So I wanted tonight to talk about Sila, which is the Pali word for virtue, or ethical living. And there is a description of the Dharma that is formulated as a tripod. And one leg is Sila, or virtue, and one is Samadhi, which is concentration, and one is wisdom, or Panya. And one of my teachers, Ruth Dennison, used to love to talk about Sila, Samadhi, and Panya as the description of our practice. And it's a way of talking about it that her teacher loved to talk about as well. That a lot of his Dharma talks came through this particular gateway of Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. And it's something that's really changed in how our tradition has taken root in this culture. Because often the part that's taken root is the mindfulness movement. Like mindfulness in yoga, and mindfulness in writing and art, and mindfulness in dance, and so mindfulness has sort of taken off, and all the permutations of it. Mindfulness as the mindfulness-based stress reduction program is like so big now. And the whole ethical basis of the practice has kind of disappeared a bit. And in the last year of Ruth's life, she talked about that a lot, about how I, as one of her senior students and lineage holders, had to make sure that I talked about Sila, because if we didn't integrate it and talk about it, that the mindfulness movement would lose one of its legs of part of the whole of the Buddha's teaching and become really distorted. And so she said, you have to talk about Sila. And so it was, her invitation somehow came through to me, and so I wanted to talk about it. And as I thought about it, I thought about my time in India with the teacher Punjaji, who was a non-dual teacher, an Advaita teacher, and really pretty much the rage, as Adyashanti is, and I'm sure there are...
Rupert Spira.
Who?
Rupert Spira.
Rupert Spira, and a lot of these other teachers are. And two scenes really struck me. And one is that we were all waiting for satsang, about 100 of us, and how the senior students at the gate to go into the building, and how the senior students kind of pushed through, kind of physically, to get to the front, and how there was a lot of shoving back and forth to get to the front, because as the gates opened, you could line up in the front. That was the tradition. And then everyone else would have to be behind you, so that when Punjaji came forward, he would see you and greet you and maybe touch you. And that was the pushing, to be seen and greeted by the teacher. Mm. And as I was kind of shoved out the way, I just felt what it is to have a teaching where there wasn't any ethical base, where there were no precepts and no framing of the practice of opening or awakening without the commitment to non-harming. And that really repeated itself in who was going to eat with Punjaji, who got chosen to eat with him, and the kind of backstabbing that went on in the community of who got to eat and how they didn't deserve to be at the table, and why he chose certain people. And I wasn't a senior member of the community. I was just there for a few months. But it was shocking to me that there was no guideline around right speech. So we experience over and over again in this culture the breaking of the precepts, and in an ongoing and deep way. And it's profound when some of the leaders of our political communities, as leadership, break the precepts, because I don't know if any of you have done any studying in organizational development, but we don't even need to do it, to say that leaders create the culture of the organization. That's where cultures of organizations and countries as a whole are understood, is from the ways that leaders lead. And of course it's not, there are many leaders in this country, and some of us are leaders, and I feel unapologetic in saying we're beautiful leaders. And there's some leaders who continue to break the precept in outrageous ways, and as in many of our institutions. And so sort of talking about Punjaji, just that little meditation community, little in terms of the whole vast universe, and then the leaders in this country breaking the precepts. And I just want to acknowledge the impact of that, because it's profound, and it feels like it has reverberations through all our lives. To hear, Donald Trump, for example, talk in the ways that he talks about members of our population, or how he'll say to activists in his gatherings, who are challenging him, get the hell out, just get the hell out, get them out, as though they weren't real human beings. And we all break the precepts all the time. That's part of the nature of our minds. And so I empathize with those mind states of breaking the precepts. And in thinking about this Dharma talk, I thought about the time when I was a kid and I would steal, we call them sweets, candy, from a local store near my school. And today I just remembered that the owner was Iranian, and there was something about the fact that he was Iranian that made it easier to steal candy. And then we would steal, we would organize it as a gang, and someone would distract him with questions, and then we would, put our hands in the big jars, because in those days they had big jars, and we would put our hands in and grab the candy and then run out of the door. And we would feel so proud of what we got away with. And I had no remorse then. And I'm sure the same way that Donald Trump doesn't have remorse, or that many times when we break the precepts, we don't have remorse. That that in that moment, there was such a lack of connection to the consequences and the real meaning of what I was doing. And even when I was older, because stealing was a pattern that I where I broke the precept many, many, many times of not taking what is not really offered. When I was at high school and I worked at a dress shop, it was like we were selling, dresses. I don't want to say it like that. We were selling dresses, none of which I really could relate to. And out of pure boredom, I would steal dresses, just to do something that somehow was alive in this terribly, terribly boring job of just standing by dresses and helping people to, find the right dress. And again, I felt no remorse at it, it also reminds me of the story that I think I've told you about, that was written in Turning Wheel, that the Buddhist Peace publication wrote, and it was about Manny Babbitt. Do any of you recall that? Manny Babbitt was a Vietnam veteran who came back to the United States and suffered really severe trauma. And he was PSTD, and he was walking along a road and heard gunshots. The gunshots happened to be from a TV program in a house that he was walking by, but he didn't really cognize that. And he got triggered into misunderstanding that someone was being shot. He ran into this room, like stormed through the door, and saw an older person there, but didn't quite see the reality, and killed her because he thought he was back in Vietnam. So, so he was arrested. He didn't actually pretend that he didn't murder her, and he was arrested and sentenced to death in California. And there was a big movement among activists to try and find a commutation because of the conditions that the murder took place. And many people wrote to Governor Gray Davis at that time, and even I think Bishop Tutu and different people really came together to try and save him. And they weren't able to. Governor Gray Davis didn't pardon him. And so they served Manny his last meal. And right before they injected him, he said, this is what the person who was there said. He said, "May they be forgiven, they don't know what they're doing. And may I be forgiven, I didn't know what I was doing." And I feel so moved at those places inside of us where we don't know what we're doing. And that Sila, this commitment to ethical training, is a way of helping us to become conscious, to know more what we're doing. Because so much of the time we harm and we don't know what we're doing in the moment of harming. And so the Buddha invited us to become conscious of 5 particular areas in this awakening of, may I know more what I'm doing. And the first is not to intentionally take life. At least without a reason. Because there are times when we have to take life for reasons. might be to sustain and nourish ourselves, or it might be that the mosquitoes are carrying a disease and we have to kill the mosquitoes. So it's not this absolute fundamentalist approach that some religions take. This is a very conditional approach of looking at the context of harming and saying, where can I least harm, given the conditions, in terms of refraining from taking life? That's the first one. And so the formal entryway into that is not this, as I was saying, this black and white polarity, but more, may I undertake the training to become more conscious of where I might be harming with respect to the integrity of life and the not taking of it. And I feel like I work a lot with this around the amount of fish or chicken or meat that I eat, because my body needs it a lot, and I feel like I really work with, when can I not do that? Just where can I find the balance around that? Just to be conscious of it and to hold, just as one example, that life that is being given. So the Buddha said, when we know we're taking life, to really know it deeply. When we break, when we aren't in training around a precept, when we fall into a harming behavior or a harming habit, can we know that at least? Because the knowing is so much better than the not knowing. Like my not knowing what I was doing and the repercussions of it meant there was no ground to begin to learn and address it. So the knowing of what we're doing is so much better. So the training of, in all kinds of ways, the training of refraining from taking life. And it just one other memory comes to me when I was living on Al Farm, which is that separatist women's land up in Oregon, down in Oregon, because we're up, we're the north. There, all kinds of people came and lived on that land because it was open land. We never said no to anyone. And so it was sometimes quite crazed, and there was someone who was quite challenged, mentally challenged in some ways, or just challenged in her being. But she said something to me that just stuck, because we were walking and I was just like grabbing blades of grass as we were walking, and she, just in a kind of unconscious way, and she said, "Why are you breaking the life of that grass?" And I was like, oh my gosh, there was a place where I wasn't relating to grass as life, and I was just kind of breaking it in a habitual way, taking those stems of, the long grass. And it was such a deep teaching for me to see everything as life. Just everything. And how not to take it for granted. And then the second precept is not taking what is not really offered, and more specifically not to steal. So much to say about that. But I don't want to go through it so too much more, because I actually would love you to break into diets and explore something. So, not to take what is not freely offered, and to care about the boundaries of caretaking. Who's caretaking what, and to care about that. And then it feels like the challenge for us in naming that precept is, and how does that work when we see such profound inequity in our culture? Then, when so many resources are owned by so few people, what does it mean to say, well, we're not going to take what is not freely offered, because they're certainly not freely offering the amount of resources they're holding. And so how do we understand that? How do we understand indigenous people wanting to reclaim sacred land of theirs when it was forcibly taken, but now it isn't, quote, theirs? And that question, just as killing animals, it really asks us to look at what is our motivation. Because key in these precepts or commitments of cultivating caring and respect for ourselves and life and not harming is looking at what our motivation and intention is. And is the intention in reclaiming, because I feel like a lot of our movement is about reclaiming what we've lost through colonization. Whether it's land or water or air, like just purifying air, what is our intention? Is it coming out of anger? And what is the quality of anger? Is it that sense of entitled anger? This isn't yours, it's mine? Is it coming out of a caring? This is not justice. And how can, in my actions of reclaiming what is lost, I express respect and equity? So, just looking at the larger question of the precept of refraining from stealing and not taking what is not given, because all of these precepts are very deep in terms of inquiring into how we live our lives as practitioners and activists. And then the third precept is not harming through our sexuality, our sexual expression. And that really asks us to look at the ways that we objectify our own bodies and we objectify others. It asks us to open to our own sexual energies in ways that heal and support us, and to open really how we even think about sexuality. When I think of some of the tantric practices that are used in other traditions, how sexuality is in the service of awakening. Like, do we use our sexual expressions in the service of awakening? Do we remember to share the merit of it, to begin by sharing the merit of it? I mean, is it more habitual? Like, what does it mean not to harm in our sexual expression? Does it mean that we are habitual and we don't have sex enough because we're not really respecting that part of our life? Or does it also mean the flip of it? That we use sex a lot but without bringing in the real dignity of it. And then just I've been challenged a lot in by some of my friends to think more openly from monogamy into polyamorous relationships, and how habitual am I in my monogamous setup? Just not anything other than the precept about the subtleties of what's harming and what isn't come from the lack of awareness and consciousness about how we live in these relationships. So, I'm talking about the more subtle aspects of that. And then the fourth precept is to refrain from lying, from speaking the untruth, to refrain from gossip and slander, to refrain from speaking at the inappropriate times. So timely, truthfully, and kindly. And then the last one is to refrain from losing mental balance through our consumption, particularly of alcohol and mind-altering substances, but then everything. And in the Theravadan tradition, it's to refrain from all alcohol. And then in the other traditions, like when I was with Sokni, he said, "Oh, go buy a bottle of wine and go up to the hill." There was another guy there that in the center that was having a hard time. Go take John up and drink a bottle of wine, because in that tradition it was use alcohol to relax and open the system. Mm-hmm. So just different ways of honoring what we consume and how we consume it to support our being. And when does it become overconsumption? Whatever it is. So that's a lot, and I don't want to go on, even though of course I have a ton more to say, which I usually do, because let's break into dyads and explore one place you would like to call in more awareness in terms of one of the precepts. And some place where you feel like it's a precept you tend to, the challenge is there and you would like to meet the challenge. So break into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8